Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the latest episode of Hardcore Photography. I'm your host, Mike, and I'm here with my good friend, Sticky Rick. All right, man. So what's going on with photography, dude? Because I gotta get a freaking podcast out of this shit. So what's up?
Okay, are you recording? Okay, you are recording.
We're up recording. I always start early just in case we say something really cool. I want to make sure I get it.
Yeah, because that's us. It's something really cool just comes out.
Yeah, well, hey, there was this, real quick, don't lose your train of thought, but I want to tell this story real fast. There was there's a harmonic player down here named Rod Piazza and the Mighty Flyers. And he was telling a story about recording, and he was talking to that other harmonic player that I'm always talking about. Can't remember his name. Dave, whatever the fuck his name is. Anyway, the thing was, so he's telling the story, and he says, when I'm in the studio, I'm always running because every so often, okay, we were, he said, well, I was hanging out with a bunch of guys, and we had somebody had gotten a hold of this harmonica that was a low A flat. This thing was freaking low. So I'm playing this thing, and at the end I go, "Hey man, did you get that?" And the engineer goes, "Was I supposed to record that?" Shit. So he goes, "Now every time I go in there, as soon as I pick up a harp and start playing, they're recording because you never know when it's coming down. So that's the reason why I record early." All right, so go ahead and tell me what you got.
Okay, you asked me a question earlier this week.
Uh-huh.
And the question is, where do I post my work?
Oh, yeah. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, short answer is I don't.
Yeah, I also noticed that.
I'm not looking to become a photographer by trade. I'm an amateur guy who wants good pictures of his family and friends. I don't need, I'm not, I have an idea for a set of photos if I ever get around to it that I will do. But until that time, there's no reason to really make more of a big deal of, pictures of my fucking family.
Okay. Well, the reason I asked you that is because, even when you're not shooting, major work, or you're doing, whatever, we are on a podcast. So now we don't have a lot of people that we know. Well, I don't know exactly how many people are listening to this podcast. I can't even really tell you that because the analytics that I have are not particularly the greatest. It basically just tells me, a couple people that have listened and where, and I don't know if it's the same person or where they're from or anything like that. So the analytics that I have are really pretty basic and not, I actually have better analytics from my website than I do because I'm using straight up Google Analytics over there. Thing about Spreaker is which differs from Anchor. Anchor had really good analytics and not only told you who was listening, it told you where they're listening from. So I knew that there were people from Japan, there were people from Australia, there were people from all over the world listening to us. But Spreaker doesn't really tell you that, so I don't know exactly who's listening. So anyway, to make a long story short, if you when you're talking to people, it's very likely that they may want to see what you're doing. So that's why I was wondering where you had, if you had posted anything. The only thing I've actually seen from you of concrete work is a few things that you post like in your feed on Facebook.
Yeah.
And then when we did that, we're attempted to do that.
The wide angle.
Yeah, the wide angle thing. You posted some of your fisheye stuff. Fisheye. Fisheye is pretty cool, especially if you. The thing about fisheye is that it requires that you your composition. That's the trick. Because
what I learned with the fisheye is it's about lines. It's about straight lines and and just making them work for a composition.
Yeah, well, I go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I picked up the same thing. I was shooting I think a 24 or 28 or something like that, and I realized it's the same thing. Most of the lens distortion is not going to be as obvious if you don't have straight lines to curve.
Right.
Yeah, I can shoot all the portraiture I want, and you're going to, you'll pick up the lens distortion. Well, if I take it off, because when I import it into Lightroom, it gets automatically fixed. Well, not fixed. I don't want to say fixed because that's not really, it's not broken. It's not a bad thing. It's if you want it. And if you're using a 28 millimeter lens or a 24 millimeter lens or a fisheye, you know what you're doing, because most people are not going to be doing that. I wouldn't really consider it broken, but what I would say is that the composition is important as far as straight lines, because that is what's going to that's where it's obvious. And I didn't even know what it was. What lens distortion was, but one time I took a picture of that girl I was dating, Karen, and she stuck her face in my car window, and I shot her picture, and when it came out, it was all freaking distorted out, and I'm like, what the fuck is it? What's wrong with my camera? Well, I knew what it was. The camera had changed the focal length in order to, well, not the actual focal length, but it had changed the focal length in order to accommodate the fact that she was so close, and all the outside information that it was processing in order to take the JPEG. And it was kind of weird. I still have that picture, and it's kind of cool. And so that is the kind of wide angle stuff that I was going for. So anyway, that's my bent on.
Well, the thing I learned. I was going to say the thing I learned about fisheye is that there is the lens has different points in it. All right, let's hear it for Texas.
This sucks.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, I lost you from the start about when you said about the thing about fisheye is, and then you just kind of dropped out.
Okay. All right, well, with fisheye, you can control the distortion by where you place your focal point.
Okay.
Because towards the outside, your distortions get real bad. But in the center, it kind of comes back into almost a normal focal length.
Yeah, I kind of noticed that. Some of your stuff, it was obvious. The lens distortion was obvious, but other places, I could pick it up, but it wasn't as dramatic. And I expected with a fisheye, it would be freaking nuts, but it wasn't. It wasn't what I was. I've never done any fisheye work at all, so I don't know. But it just seemed, I was expecting it to be like extreme, like security camera extreme, but it really wasn't. Well, there were some things that were, and I've seen work where it is fairly extreme. Like when they're shooting up, like a lot of people, whenever they first get going on fisheye, they like to go into like a high-rise cityscape and shoot upwards, and it gives it gives you that claustrophobic, like it's falling in on you, which is, that's standard. That's standard. Everybody does that because it gives you an idea of what can be done with a fisheye. But I noticed that some of the stuff. Oh, and I've also seen like long open buildings, like train stations or things like that.
Right.
Yeah, it's really obvious, and that's one of the reasons I was talking a ways back about getting a 14 millimeter for my Sony, and that was one of the reasons why. It's because there's a train station in Anaheim that's all freaking. It's like all glass. It's freaking weird. Train and bus station, but. I'd seen pictures of similar buildings shot from one end high, like on the second floor, down into the main lobby, and it looks pretty freaking cool. So that's kind of the reason. But I was expecting really like freaky extreme. but it didn't materialize. And I'm thinking that that the same could be obviously you can do the same thing, or you can expect the same thing from other focal lengths. Like if I get this 14 millimeter, it's more than just pointing at something and getting a shot, because because you have to you have to work the lens. But a lot of people don't see, because I didn't know that, and I wasn't, cause in all honesty, last time I really was working with a wide angle was this last thing we were doing when I went down in Riverside and was doing it, and that was kind of an eye opener, because some of the stuff, and you can see it on my webpage, some of the stuff it didn't seem that bizarre.
Right.
Yeah, well, I was expecting to get some really bizarre distortion, but I didn't get it. And then, of course, I figured out that Lightroom is fixing it. But even when I went in and took off the distortion correction, it still didn't give me what I was looking at. You know, that's why you can use wide angle for shooting like landscapes, and you get and it's not obvious. You know, I mean, there has to be a certain amount of distortion, because your lenses have got to focus wider than the human eye onto a frame that is as wide as the human eye, and so that's why it has to tweak it slightly in order to fit it all on there. Otherwise, it wouldn't fit. You know, I mean, it's hard for some people to understand the concept, but you can an analogy would be as if you're watching our old TVs. For those of you who are not 50 years old, our old TVs were square. Yeah, well, you'd be surprised how many people don't. You know, I'll tell them something. Yeah, and they're just blown away. It's like, your TV was square. Your TV was made out of glass. What the fuck? So, what people don't realize, and this happened when the TVs were starting to get wide. You know, they're becoming widescreen. You know, they don't make square TVs anymore. They don't make square TVs anymore. No, but ever since
nobody films in that aspect anymore.
No, they don't. But see, what was happening is the TV was square. The movies were not you know one to one. They were well, depending on the format, they were getting you were getting I know there's an aspect ratio that I'm using for some of the cinematic crops that I'm doing. But
I want to say 1 to 3, but I'm not positive.
Oh, it might actually be 9:16. I'm not exactly sure, but hold on. Let me see if we can get the aspect ratio of that, because each film, like there was Panavision and a bunch of other types of film, and they all had, and a lot of them had a different aspect ratio. And the one I'm using is a crap, where is it? Here it is, aspect ratio and framing. The one that I'm using is it's saying the aspect ratio is 4:3. That's what you're using for digital photography right now. But the ratio I was using, here it is, 1.33 to 1. That's the aspect ratio that I was using for doing that cinematography, or that stuff that I was that cinematic crop that I was using was I believe it was 1.33 or 1.37 to 1, and that would give me that super wide angle. So anyway, getting back to what I was originally talking about before I had to get into that, what was happening was that the TVs were 1 to 1, and the for lack of a definitive answer, we'll say it was 4 to 3, but film was 4 to 3. Well, what people don't realize, and sometimes it's hard to wrap their head around, is that you cannot put a 4 to 3 aspect ratio on a 1 to 1 screen, because when you do that, you end up having to chop off the outside of the picture. And so what was happening is they were reformatting films to play on a TV, and one of the things that they were doing was either sliding the aspect ratio to one side or the other, whatever side they thought